Okay. If everyone's all right, I'm going to record this evening. There actually are some participants on Zoom at the moment, so if they come, we can let them in. But I thought we'll record it. So we have this recorded for half an hour. So, welcome everybody. Good evening. It's a very welcome that I bring from this rainy day where we are going to have excellent speakers that will talk with us this evening, talking on the topic of understanding power safely. So, the word safely is intriguing, isn't it? Even more intriguing, our speaker is offering to take us on a journey from the Garden of Eden to the 2040s. His name is Douglas Ford. He works as a coach. He is an expert on leadership and selecting people. He's also a visiting professor of the University of Chichester. Douglas will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to have some time for responses from our guests, who we're also delighted to welcome. We have Sue Jones, Dean of our Cathedral. Sue has my nice Sue. She's written her PhD on the topic of the personality profile of Anglican clergy. Very intriguing there. And so we are going to bring a little bit from Sue on our panel tonight, and also a very welcome to Martin Henwood. Martin is the Vicar of Dartford in Kent. He has held leadership roles in the NHS and in Dartford, and has particularly studied what happens when people interact in groups. So very welcome to you both as well. And then after that, it'll be over to us to ask questions if we would like to. So we'll have a chance as well to feed in. Now, yesterday, Douglas joined us in worship at St. Bride's here, and he reflected on an encounter he had with two people 40 years ago. He's been recently thinking about how he now reframes that encounter as an angelic one, and one which has now shaped his vocation and sent him on a journey of healing and purposeful work, or you could say ministry. We enjoyed thinking about whether we too had ever entertained angels unawares, and considered as well whether our own memories might mean more than we understood at the time. So, without further ado, please would you welcome Douglas Ford.
Thank you all very much. This evening, I want to tell you 3 stories about knowledge, power, and danger. The first is from the present day. The second goes back to the Garden of Eden. The third looks forward to the 2040s. Taken together, I believe the 3 stories unwrap some hope for us in a dark time. The hope for a wiser, more ethical, more human society for anyone born today, but a hope which I think is only fully realized in the light of Christ. We will be more knowledgeable and less frightened of our dependence on each other. We will be more knowledgeable and less frightened of our dependence on God. And we will have a more knowledgeable, less frightened understanding of power. In the course of 40 minutes, I'm going to try and discuss the gaping hole in the Western soul, and how the second hole in the Bible, yes, I think there is one, is full of relevance to it. But to kick off with our first story, I need you to join me now in your mind in the boardroom of a British organisation which you know well and which has many outlets in this city. My book opens with this coaching situation, which I was in a few years ago. Henry is the chief executive of a large organisation with tens of thousands of employees. Catherine is his financier. Of course, Henry and Catherine are not very alone. Days are long and problems arise all the time, Keeping the show on the road on a job of this scale falls to Henry's number 2, his operations chief. And when that person resigns, Henry asks Catherine temporarily to fill the gap, to be Henry's number 2 and keep doing her day job at the same time. Temporarily lasts more than a year, during which time I become Catherine's coach. Coaching leaders is my main work. For doing both jobs, Catherine receives about 10% extra on her salary. When at last the long search for a permanent number 2 is over, Henry says something nice to Catherine about a special purpose. But it's over. When the day comes for paying bonuses, all Catherine gets is a humiliating disappointment in front of junior staff. Catherine is furious, but also at a loss. Can she take on her boss? Should she? To take on the top boss in a he said, she said, is usually to lose your job, as well as the power struggle. But this time, it's Henry who's invited a few weeks later to spend more time with his family. Although this outcome is unusual, my experience is that the interplay of knowledge, power, and danger in this story is not unusual. One danger I refer to is the danger of losing your job, and perhaps your reputation. Power is easy to spot. Henry has a lot of it, which he uses unjustly. In corporate life, this happens, but is discussed rarely. Is rarely discussed. Only a few senior executives, like Catherine, will be in the know. All of them not only have mortgages to pay, but also take seriously their duty not to trash the reputation of the organisation which they have helped lead. In this case, Henry's power met the countervailing power of the board, and they asked him to go. But nothing of this is explained publicly. A few are in the know. Most of us are ignorant, and the widespread ignorance isn't accidental. This story is also about a different and much more consequential pattern of knowledge and ignorance. This is more than about corporate dirty washing. There's a bigger ignorance here. Once again, it is a pattern in which a few are in the know. Most of us are ignorant, and the ignorance is not accidental. That is knowledge about power itself as the subject. On that topic, not even Catherine was particularly in the know, despite her extensive business education, which had nothing really to say about how to respond to a boss's bullying. When I coach someone in a situation like this, typically they see a bleak, chaotic situation with only a few options for action. Typically, a coachee in a Catherine type of situation might see only 2 possibilities, both stomach-churning. One is to suck up the abuse, and the other is to lodge a grievance. The latter will probably involve lawyers. With nothing in writing, the CEO will probably win. Meanwhile, the complainant's day job will become deeply unpleasant, and she may face obstacles in landing a better job somewhere else. Part of what I try to bring into situations like this is empathy and calm thinking, but another part is knowledge about power. I know that almost always there are more options for action than the initial shock reveals. Often I encourage a brainstorming approach, covering every possible response my coachee and I can think of. Now, some of those possibilities will be unethical, but naming them in a safe place will be cathartic. Doing this work will contribute to a calm, ethically informed final decision. But along the way, smarter and different options or points of view. We may discover how Catherine put out in an ethical but politically skilled way, which doesn't leave all the risk on the innocent part. To be politically skilled is to be knowledgeable about power. Any leader has at least a little bit of this knowledge, perhaps unwittingly. but mostly our leaders, especially our more team-spirited ethical leaders like Catherine, are not in the know about power. They don't know much and they fear finding out. And they are fearful because they are smart, not because they're weak. They notice that courses for future leaders bang on about leadership, math, influence, and authenticity, but not about power. They absorb exhortations about doing the right thing. But teaching your boss a lesson is never given as an example. And of course, they notice, we all do, what is spoken about plainly and what is only said in whispers. Even children notice that. And then they look at the leaders above. Those who relish talking about power tend to have distended egos and no nerves. They have lost something precious about being human, and our ethical leaders do not want to end up. The result is that the Catherines of this world fear that knowledge about power is dangerous. So my role becomes in part to help them understand power safely. When decent leaders choose not to understand power, they get hurt, and so do we, because shaping the material world is left disproportionately to the selfish, to the ruthless, to our least human leaders. For 18 years, I was a headhunter, hanging around seats of power and helping fill them. I have also been a leader. Yet I was as much in the dark as Catherine about power until I quit headhunting and completed a doctorate in management. That is quite a nerdy thing to do. In fact, it creates the risk that you become so obsessed with new knowledge that you can only talk about it using very long words. Sometimes there are good reasons for academics to use long words, and frankly, I am just as insecure as any of you. So I have written an essay with long words in it about this problem called Understanding Power Safely, and you can download that for free from my writing website. In that essay, I don't take any religious view, but because tonight I passionately want to speak as a Christian, because I think it matters that we join Catherine's predicament up with the Garden of Eden and the Gentiles. But I'm going to take a shortcut and just ask you to take what I next say as, if you will, the fruit of my practical experience as a coach. I think there are dangers to understanding power. Those dangers include losing your soul, by which I mean losing whatever is most precious to you about being human. To manage those dangers and understand power safely, I believe we need to ask 3 questions of any text or any person, myself included, who claims to offer insight into power. Test 1. Is power understood to be inseparable from ethics? Most books you could pick up today with power in the title will fail this test. Power will be presented as a set of ethically neutral, possibly scientific techniques for getting your own way. Gun manufacturers do exactly the same thing. They claim that their products are neither good nor bad. The ethics, they say, lies wholly in the people who use the guns. But power is a much more complex thing than a gun. It's part of the brand and being of human relationships. So what does test 1 mean in a Henry and Catherine situation, where it's my words and coaching actions that are doing any teaching? It means my earning Catherine's trust that whatever feelings and possible actions we discuss, she will not end up with her soul carelessly left behind in some supposedly neutral ethical desert. That I commit to her in 2 senses, that we will look for wisdom, wholeness, and power together. Meaning that, A, we will look together for these things, and that we will look for these things, wholeness, wisdom, and power, ethics, to be found together. So, test 1, power inseparable from ethics. Test 2. Is your existence and good understood to be inseparable from mine and from other people's? Now, an African name for this is Ubuntu, and shortly I will return to this in the context of the Garden of Eden. But for now, the test means throwing out of the window the concept of power most familiar in the West, which is the idea that power is the manipulative advantage of one solitary individual over others. Ubuntu warns us that if we try to play win-lose power games, I am on both sides of that seesaw. What is good for Catherine, and what is good for Henry, and what is good for everyone affected by their organisation are joined at the hip. So test 2, my good, my existence and my good, and yours cannot be separated and treated as separate. Test 3, does the teacher, or author, or text stand before us as a human being, open and vulnerable, open, for example, about how they gained and have personally applied the lessons that they are now offering? This test excludes most scientific and pseudo-scientific teaching in which the author paints themselves in the invisible cloak of being an expert. In a coaching situation, it is likely to require attentively dealing with the other person, bringing knowledge where you can, but not pretending to it where you cannot. A challenge familiar to anyone who has held another's hand in a tough place. To be clear, I am sure better ways to test whether understandings of power are safe will come forward. But now you have what I'm going to give power, something with which to explore power safely and unafraid, instead of leaving the keys to the universe, the head. Probably the most instantly recognizable story about knowledge, power, and danger is the account of creation in Paul in the 2nd and 3rd chapters of Genesis. There is forbidden knowledge which results in death, yet God gives Adam and Eve the power to make that choice. He does not put the relevant tree beyond their reach. In order to offer a reading of this story from an Ubuntu perspective, I need to say a bit more about Ubuntu. My wife Patricia and I first made Ubuntu's acquaintance soon after we married in 1990. South Africa became part of our lives, to the extent that today we have many friends and a house in Johannesburg. Ubuntu also explains why, many years later, as soon as I encountered the doctorate in management program at the University of Hertfordshire, I applied right away. Not that Ubuntu or Black African thinkers appeared in the program's prospectus. Indeed, the biggest influences on my own doctorate were Frankfurt, Germany, the sociologists Pierre Bourdieu and Norbert Elias. But the program made clear its commitment to exploring, within Western scholarship, the possibility of a radically social basis for human identity. And to me, that was Ubuntu by another. Opening this year's Lambeth Conference of Anglican Bishops, Bishop Vicente of Lesotho used the word Ubuntu, brought many of us by Desmond Tutu. It can be translated, I am because you are, or I am because we are. But then what the West we mostly do with this word is we put it on the mantelpiece, treating it as an ornament, a charming way to describe being nice to other people. It is instead an alarm and a challenge, and frankly, in our dark times, it is an emergency. Ubuntu contradicts the Cartesian assumption, I think, therefore I am. By asking himself what was beyond doubt, Descartes attached his name to a worldview whose foundational element was a single disembodied mind. Now, since then, in academic philosophy, a vast amount of water has flowed under that bridge. But large parts of our daily life, business life and political life, have Descartes baked inside. So much that we do, learn or say, amplifies the idea that each of us is alone, trying to survive in a win-lose world, endowed with humanity by virtue of our faculty for rational choice. Now, some sayings you come across swim against this tide, for example, win-win, or living more simply so that others may simply live. However, Descartes still lives inside us if we understand these phrases as choices about how to live. Ubuntu isn't a choice, it's a claim about how we come to exist. Christians are Ubuntu people. The Christian claim to personhood is, I am a person because God, who is relationship before all worlds, commands me to call him Abba, Father. And because that command is not directed at me alone, in the word Abba, Father, are already embedded the words system and God. Last year, I had the privilege of giving some morning reflections at the Synod of Anglican Bishops for Southern Africa. I suggested that Christianity is like Ubuntu squared. We are in Ubuntu with each other because we are all in Ubuntu with God. Now let's listen to the story of the fall, retold with a sensitivity in our minds to Ubuntu versus Descartes. When the fall happens, one thing changes before everything else. Before, Adam and Eve are naked and not ashamed. Then, in an instant, the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. But they sewed fig leaves together. They did not hide from each other and then. This newly arrived shame is not sexualized. They are not ashamed of seeing each other naked. The shame is between self-conscious creatures and their creator, as Adam says, addressing God. I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. So the shame described is embarrassment at being embodied, turning out not to be of the same dignity as God at all. The clothing is needed to shield Adam's mind from the offence of his own body, likewise Eve. And so the disdain of the flesh has begun, a retreat towards the mind retreating from its own body, beginning to become like a dog, deploring the finite animal frame from which it contemplates the universe. The retreat of the mind towards Descartes. Next, every story relies on our imagination of what would have happened if the characters had acted differently. For years, I have assumed the fall's what if to be that Adam and Eve refused the apple and remained innocent and ignorant. That makes the story a story about obedience. But if we focus on Ubuntu, I think a rather different what if appears quite obvious. What if Adam and Eve had stayed in relationship with God rather than stepping unilaterally outside? What if they had asked God, why would I put this tree if we are not to eat it? What makes this knowledge dangerous? Now we are in a very different meaning world, one in which I dare you to imagine God replying, I want to share that knowledge with you. But first, we're going to have to talk about understanding how to say it. Finally, a focus on Ubuntu wants us to notice some unfinished business. As Christians, we think we know what the fall's unfinished business is. We need a second Adam to do the work of redemption. Yes, and from an Ubuntu perspective, the fallen isn't. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve fall out of Ubuntu with God and the embodied creation. But they have not yet fallen out of Ubuntu with each other. They leave the garden together, but having become like gods, God says so in Genesis 3:22. To eat fruit and gain knowledge is a fixed temptation for a human, but the temptations suitable for gods or those who have become like them are different. We are shown what those temptations are in Jesus' temptations in the desert. These temptations could only be equal to the God. The power to turn stones into bread, the power to jump from the temple and be unhurt, the power to see the whole world and control it. If Jesus, the second Adam, had said yes, that would have been the same before. In fact, reinforcing an Ubuntu perspective, each of Jesus' no's emphasizes that he is staying in relationship. But now, we, now out of the garden, and now like gods, now facing the temptations of gods, we say yes to those questions. Here, illuminated by Ubuntu, the story of knowledge and power and danger, which began in the garden, reaches its climax. Jesus is alone in the desert. The view offered from a high place in the desert and in Cartesian thought is offered to the perspective of a solitary mind, in which everything and everyone, including those to whom the person is closest, becomes an object of manipulation. In the garden, we fall out of Ubuntu with God and creation. When we deeply enough inhale, I think, therefore I am, we finish the job and fall out of Ubuntu with each other. In this tale, to jump from the Garden of Eden to the Garden of Gethsemane is to miss a whole disc in the box set. The overlooked disc speaks directly to today's dark, lonely times. And a story about dangerous knowledge which God does not want us to have turns in this perspective into the story of what God will do, responding to our preach to give us that knowledge safely. We have an essential task before turning the 2040s. I must answer how the Bible itself measures up against my three-part test for understanding our sin. Test 1. Does the Bible teach that power is inseparable from ethics? Yes, it teaches that nothing and no one is beyond the reach of judgment. Within the first minute of opening the Bible, we read that even God's own actions are subject to his judgment, and God saw that it was good. Test 2. Does the Bible teach that my existence and good are inseparable from ethics? Is it an Ubuntu text? Yes, I have just argued that Christianity is Ubuntu square. Test 3. Does the teacher or author stand before us as a human being, open and vulnerable? Yes, at the greatest possible cost is the incarnation. So perhaps God does want us to understand how to see. Come the end of this October, I have an exciting opportunity to work for 6 weeks with a group of 17-year-olds in an East London state school, working through a prototype introduction to understanding power safety. I owe the opportunity to a teacher who read my opinions and made the effort to get in touch. It feels a bit like the Wright brothers almost 120 years ago. If we managed to do it in 12 seconds, I think we'll count it as a success. As I've explained earlier, I've written an essay explaining the issues in this talk from a secular perspective, and the work I was doing at school was from a secular perspective. But my goal in 6 weeks will not be so much to answer a question as to ask one. Indeed, to make a question burn in the course participants' minds. I want them to notice that there is something puzzling about the education options they face, something which makes no sense. The question I want them to become entranced by is, why isn't it straightforward to go to university to study power? Of course, if you're sufficiently gifted and hardworking, you can go to university to study psychology, or sociology, history, management, law, or maybe war, or economics, or philosophy, or even mathematics, which includes gaming. In each of these subjects, you can study a little bit of power, but only after racking your brains on a huge mass of unrelated stuff. If you choose politics, you will study power, but only from the perspective really of governing nations and societies. Neither Henry nor Catherine were particularly interested in that. If understanding power safely is fundamental to human flourishing, which I say it is. If it is an intellectually rich, multifaceted subject worthy of a university education, which I think is beyond that, it is clearly capable of stretching minds at the doctoral level. If it is as relevant, or more so, to creating a just, tolerant, and prosperous society than business and management, currently the most learned subjects in Britain at undergraduate level, why cannot today's 17-year-olds tick a box and say, I'd like to study power, please? The course available today, which has the most obvious potential to approximate the study of power, may be philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford, which is perhaps why so many of our prime ministers turn out to study today. But I'm interested in knowledge about power for the many, rather than the few. So I want to imagine the futures of two children, Abby and Kumar, both born in Britain later this year, both going to university in 2040. In Abby's future, our higher education system changes. Programs typically called Power and Human Flourishing start appearing at many universities. Some will expect you to read Foucault in your first year, others will have a more how-to thing. Some are reflective, drawing on students' already diverse experiences of power and bullying, in families, in schools, in gangs, in religious groups, and on social media. Joint programs will be all the rage: power in modern languages, power in history, power in business, power in gender, power in climate. Each addresses in their own way the linkages between knowledge, power, and danger. Each would help Abby thrive in whatever kind of life she pursues, not simply because the knowledge that she carries in her head. That would be a very Cartesian way to think about it, because a university system such as I have just described could only exist in a society in which learning about power and discussing power issues openly and naturally is taken for granted at every stage of someone's career. That world, Abby's future world, is not a world free of bad deeds, but it is a world in which there are fewer enemies, because as a society we will produce and promote fewer of them. Instead of a society of the largely power blood, in which one-eyed Henrys can be king, Abby will help create a society of the sighted, in which the ethically deficient use of power shows up as the weakness it truly is. While Abby's world is possible, I'm not sure that this was I'm going to bet. I'm not sure universities can or will change in the way this future evolves. In the first place, power is intrinsically multidisciplinary. I cannot imagine how we could teach it at all at university level without bringing together, as a minimum, philosophy, sociology, and psychology. And the institutional structure of knowledge at universities means that it's very hard, indeed, to do multidisciplinary innovation. And the reasons for this institutional inertia are not all bad. But there are two bigger problems. First, the better funded and so most powerful parts of university, for example, those teaching STEM subjects, economics and management, may have Descartes too deeply embedded to be able for the university system to escape. And second, is it in the interest of the power for the rest of us to understand power safely? If I'm an employer, will I want to hire a graduate with a first-class honours in power? So let me imagine a different future, I'm calling Kumar's future, in which the church is a player. In the 2020s, the church wraps its mind around understanding power safely. By the time Kumar is 8 in 2030, several theological colleges have integrated the subject into priest training. There, the subject is understood in a faith-filled way, but priests are also given the skills to open students' minds and facilitate discussions which do not require a prior faith commitment. And it is as a 15, 16, and 17-year-old taught by a priest contributing to the life skills program that Kumar's arms are open. Unlike Anna, Kumar will not have straightforward options to study power deeply and safely at college. Let's say instead he chooses economics and business. But as he does so, and when he gets a job, and when he gets sent for leadership training, he will remember the tests for understanding policy. He will be aware and alert when a politician or media pundit is speaking with Descartes himself. He will understand why, in that view, power becomes the manipulation of others. And he will know that unless corrected by other perspectives, that teaching endangers not only the manipulated, but the manipulators. There have been times from the Church's earliest days when what we had to offer was genuinely emancipating and received as something of orthodox. But now our institutional and intellectual credibility has shrunk so much that Cumar's future may seem to you less likely than happiness. But I put it to you that the odds are the other way around. Because fundamentally, it is weakness that makes it possible to release the knowledge about power. And as Christians, we should find something quite familiar about that. I have put in front of me two pairs of footsteps going forward in the sands of time. But change doesn't like planting its feet where minds have already trod. So neither of those scenarios will likely happen. But I do believe that one way or another, if we can survive the climate emergency, which is an enormous scale, a better future does await our youth too. I believe that they will look back to our time in relation to power, as we look back to the 1950s in relation to sex. Knowledge will act, change will come, and our infinitely resourceful Creator does intend us to understand power safe. That ends my third story about knowledge, power, and change. So in closing, I need to deal with three loose ends. First, in retelling the Garden of Eden story, so that it reaches forward to Jesus' temptations in the wilderness, I am, at least in the way I understand the Bible, straddling mythical time and historical time. So I should come clean on whether I can put a date on the second fall. You all earn some light relief, so I'm going to help go. James Ussher, the Archbishop of Armagh, famously calculated that the creation took place at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of October 4004 BC, although I'm not sure in which time zone. How amusing God says the human would be if the second fall took place in Ussher's own lifetime, say in the early 1600s. Let me propose that it did. In Britain, we understood Ubuntu once. Indeed, we all know these words of John Donne, Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls. Born in 1672, Donne died in 1631. Both events preceded by about 20 years the corresponding birth and death of René Descartes. James Ussher was sort of squashed in between. So as a convenience of speech, I suggest the second fall starts in that 20-year gap. Since both Donne and Descartes lived for about 55 years, my 20-year gap is actually about 75. In coming back time and again to Descartes, I'm copying Steven Spielberg's 1993 movie Schindler's List, which he shot in black and white except for one 3-year-old girl in a red coat. Spielberg wanted us not to be blinded by the enormity of what he showed us, and he hoped to make his story more memorable. So Descartes is my thinker in a red coat. There were many, many others. Secondly, I'm eagerly and gratefully awaiting my COVID booster this Wednesday. I am not anti-science. What is fatal in the second fall is not the success of science, but the proliferation of science-only thinking, the denial or diminution of any truth which is relational, the idolatry which excludes from existence anything which a solitary, abstract mind cannot inspect from the top of a scientific mountain, and sweeps everything which can be so inspected into a tray of objects for manipulation. The second fall continues and accelerates, For example, in the last century, the pandemic spread of their path inside through economics, business, and management practices has been propelled by explosive growth in the number of business schools. Made worse after the Second World War through the doctrine of shareholder value maximization and the lonely, selfish intellectual models which made that truth seem obvious. Finally, the publication of Rev'd prompted a practice question to me last year from Tara Mo, the host of a podcast called The Game of Teams. She asked me, what is power if it's not the manipulation of others? I think any understanding of power sits like flesh and blood, linked to an understanding of human individuality. That is why, in the end, understanding power is a necessity, not an option. If, wittingly or not, we think society is made of solitary minds interacting with each other, then power has no option but to be manipulation. But if instead power is a complex feature of human relationships, present as soon as two or three are gathered together, if we are a will-to-be, what is power? In my secular essay, I attempt a clumsy answer. But as Christians, we have a beautiful answer. Does where two or three are gathered together bring influence? Power, rightly understood, seems to me another name for the Holy Spirit, who, I contend, longs for us to understand as Savior. I'm profoundly grateful for your time and attention. In the name of the one God, whose name may be judgment, love, and power.
And like you, I had the opportunity to read script 2 times and the 4th time. And each time I go back to the talk, something different happens. And I guess my immediate and gut response as I keep reading is yes, yes, yes. I can go with you in what you're trying to argue here about power. And having been a victim is the right word, I'm not sure, but having been a victim of a powerful church in which I felt totally disabled to be able to, as you put in your story, defend myself, again, that's the right word. I can see how power can be misused. And I suppose there is just so much in here, and there's such a wealth of stuff. I can spend all night talking to you about some of the issues. But for me, I've always seen my leadership, that's even the right word, it's not my leadership, but in the context of the Rev'd icon of the Trinity, having Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and myself in that picture as well, as a dispersed way of understanding what God has called me to be. And I suppose my question, which may be a bit of an unfair question, is in relation to the church. And it would be wonderful to see the vision of 2040 coming to fruition, where the church takes a stand and asks the question, what does power look like? But from my perspective, the church is caught up in power. The church has people in powerful positions, which is, I find, very difficult then to confront that power. And I suppose my question to you is, how do we, because we are part of Christ, model something so profoundly different, where power is shared, where we work together, two or three gather together, to further God's kingdom, which isn't about manipulating people, but it's about engaging with people.
What's to say sorry about that? Nonsense.
I think Douglas is often very pathetic way forward. And I want to share that story and make a couple of comments. The story which goes back to my childhood at a minor public boarding school, in which I was summoned into the housemaster's study and said, you are to be killed. And as a 13-year-old, I found myself absolutely terror-struck. And I found myself saying these words, I am not going to allow you to kill me. Then I came out with these words, I am not going to allow you to demean yourself as a human being. There was a moment, but it could have gone either way. My housemaster said that your parents have signed before giving permission to kill me. But I, permission. What I then said was, I will take any other form of non-corporate. And I've told that story for sort of meals with friends many years ago, but I don't just really return to it because I now hear that word, I am not going to allow you to take me differently from an Ubuntu perspective. I am who I am, and you are who you are, and we are who we are because of our identity together. And it only hit me, following reading Douglas's lecture, that my housemaster, who was a Christian, may well have heard those words differently from a petulant 13-year-old. I am not going to allow you to kill me. You have who you think I am. God's name disclosed in the Old Testament is I am who I am. I will be who I will be. We know the stories of God I am in the Old Testament, but I'm telling you there and then. God was present in the relationship between the two of us. Because he agreed not to use the cane. And I think that I wanted to say that it was terror that drove me to that place. But it wasn't just the I am of an individual or of a housemaster at that point. It was also that sense that I am God being present. We talk of God being present in lovey-dovey situations, but God is also present in fairly confrontational things too. And that's one of the things the church is not good at. If you look at South Africa, you've got the Truth and Justice Commission, which took it on to, that experience. We need to understand ourselves in relationship. We transform ourselves. That is how transform, and I believe that is what the church is. And Sue, I'll answer your question you put to Douglas about how might the church do that, and reply to Douglas's last point, which is the Descartes mind retreats into the mind. But all of us know that we have a body. All of us know that we have a heart. And that we feel things through our hearts and through our bodies. How much do you use and interpret that? I've been very privileged to do a course recently about that. And I'm thinking that in theological colleges we're able to really get into the territory of understanding how much more we need the information from our hearts and our bodies. We might then be able to really transform our relationships. The final thing I wanted to say was really about the institutions. I'd like to start in Louise II work and build up to us and our build the And the one thing I want to say about that is the Descartes mind, the Western mind, has built our human institutions from a fallen man position. We know man's going to want everything that he wants, to grab everything that he wants. So we'll spend 40% of our population is checking up on people. In an Ubuntu world, where it takes a whole village to raise a child, everybody plays their part. Now, I'm not naive to sort of say that nobody's going to try and cheat the system, but what if every person really understood what it was to be fully accountable to each and every one of us in the way that we acted? We could redeploy so many people from checking up on each other. Finally, the last question I've got to ask is, how long have we let swathes of people not trying? Huge resources. I want to magnify this because I do think he's asked the dynamite question, and church being in the situation that it's weak in society. No, it's not weak in society, it's strength. I heard your service yesterday. It was wonderful. Wonderful, because you spoke about Europeans here. Start here, but listen.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to put it over to our lovely audience here now. Does anyone have any questions? Busy, they're lovely.
Sorry, to go first. I was thinking about what Sue was saying about the power of being sinner and standing up to it. And I was wondering, I have a philosophy of life. I am equal. I am equal to everyone here. And I've worked in different places where there have been people who have been revered power and they were doing wonderfully. And I thought, no, you're just another human being. You are as I am. And I think that we give power by our mindset. We give power to people by saying they are powerful, by looking at them as powerful. Personally, I see no one as more powerful than I am. I don't see power. But I don't know how to express that. Sorry, there was a question in there, but I can't remember what it was. It's just about power and how it's seen and how it's given.
I hear the question.
Go ahead.
Need to take a couple more.
Yes, I think so.
Okay, I'm going to try and be quick, but I find this difficult. For me, Anglican Church has an awful lot of power. The problem is the people in those power structures have no idea. They constantly work from a position of hierarchy. Don't do this. The church during my lifetime has gone from the attendance that it had right the way down because no one in high positions, in roles, they're more worried about their roles and the hierarchy and how they can make sure that the right conference gets to see others. And what you're doing is selecting from the same pool of people with the same life experiences, with the same middle class white approach. And all the people who don't fit into that category cannot relate to that power. You've got the power. We know you've got the power. We're poor. We're even without it. So we spend our lives as a black woman, as a lesbian woman. I have no power for the voice of my life. The church has this considerable amount of power, which is wielded, passing it amongst different. And that is how it is perceived by people at the bottom of that structure, thinking, we want to help, we want to do this, we want to work together, we want to link. The church isn't listening. It's not listening to the people who
are actually living the life, who are part of the church, which is not a building, it's people. I am only part of the Anglican Church because I am a member of it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be part of the church, because this is an inclusive church. This is a church that listens. When we want something at our services, we simply ask for it. And you know, it happens. Oh, that's a good idea. And we just instigate that. We change things and adapt to the moving of society and the differences and the lack of power were acknowledged by us at the bottom. I think that the Anglican Church needs to look at its hierarchy and the way it doesn't listen to people. And that it's become an entity to itself that does not relate to people in their everyday lives. And it doesn't, because you haven't got a clue what we're experiencing, because you're up there in the clouds, you're not down here living the life. And I think that that's a big part of power, and understanding power. People who understand power are the ones without it. We understand it because we spend our life trying to negotiate around it. So I suppose my question to you would be, how are we going to get the Anglican organisation to actually listen to anybody without saying, oh, I'm upset because this is my world, it's always been like this, these people are now wanting this. That's what it's too pretty, it's too protective, and you're looking out for the organisation and not opening up the doors to love and unity and cooperation and collective working. What you're doing is hierarchy. I'm boss, and do what I say. That's what that is, and that's never going to work in this way, because it is power. You've got it, you're keeping it, you won't share it.
Let me just try and say a few things in a non-church context, specifically about some questions about power there. Try and say something to those points, what you would vote to me. But then ask Sue and Martin to say something specific in relation to the Anglican. So I say it's important to understand power safety, because it's a really complicated, intricate thing. And so I have not found it helpful in the end to adopt the view that says there's nothing to understand about power, we just need to somehow just be who we are, not play other people's games, we don't need to understand it. Because I think what happens is that there is, as I forget which famous philosopher said, the lucidity of the absolute. There is total clarity in a way about power, spread amongst individuals who have very little. Not none, but relatively hard fought little bits of it. And then we have pyramids and progressions that move people into leadership positions in various walks of life, not just further up. And a number of things happen. And generally in their training, they are encouraged not to think about power. And what I think is a process where they may have started with some very acute real-life understanding of that. They go through the process of institutionalization, of being taught to think strategically, behave like a leader, act like a senior person, how to respond, and also just copying behaviors, which is one of the main ways we humans learn. So that by the time we get to a Catherine, and the Catherine I'm sorry, is a finance director in the sacred organization, I've seen equivalent to all sorts of places. You have got someone very smart, who is very ethical, and who is trying to work hard for the good. And she, I think, has a particularly privileged start in life. So she, when we started in the reflection thread, in quite junior roles in that organization. But that original knowledge is effectively removed or neutralized by an institutional process of how we're going to prepare to rise to the top. And she gets to a position near the top, where she knows very little about that. And we have to correct that, because otherwise it's the few, it's the handmaids, who are ruthless or unafraid, who take advantage of that situation. So I first of all think that there is something to be understood, and that just declaring it a non-subject or adopting a policy of mutual ignorance has not served well, and is not the way forward. But it follows from what you said, that the process of how we would educate people to understand power safety ought to include using the voices of those who are still have not had their knowledge of power taken away from them by being in position to do stuff. If I could turn to the point about whether we just kind of think that we're all equal, I absolutely think fundamentally we need to understand our blessedness from God. Each one of us a child of God. I think that God will find it deeply, deeply wrong, or does find it deeply, deeply wrong, that any one of his or their children should think of themselves as something fundamentally less. But when we're in a situation like Catherine's, I think we need two things. One is when anyone's talking to her or helping her, we need to actually say, we need to understand quite carefully how Henry's position differs from yours. We need to understand quite carefully what are the levers that Henry can pull through being the chief executive, and that you can't because of where you are. So whilst if you like starting from a position of absolute fundamental moral dignity and individuality, with a strong element of equality, to move forward in those tricky situations, I believe we have to study quite carefully what Henry has got and what he can do. And he has some things which we might call power that he can use. And if we are to be more creative in defeating those, it's better to be wise, I think. Or it's better to help people to have that knowledge and to be able to see themselves. The last thing is, I think Martin's in an extraordinary way given us many, many pieces of an answer, including pieces of an answer to Tuesday, and I hand over to you. So what is it then? Because it's not just in the church. I agree that I'm afraid in the church, that in the Anglican church, just because my own church, of which I'm proud and distressed member, all is not well at senior leadership, or certainly not as well as God would like it to be at senior leadership level. And I see that happens in a range of other institutions. Let's take our political institution. So what can we do? Because you're saying, how can we change? And I want to kind of say what Martin's thinking as far as to say is, all we have to do is hold hands with each other, not just be mentored, hold hands with each other and to say, I do not give you permission. I do not accept the poor quality of leadership that you are offering. I will not allow you to demean yourself as Prime Minister of our country or Chancellor of the Exchequer by giving such hopelessly childish answers to us as if we were not who we are. And if someone says, would your parents sign a piece of paper? Or I have a thing saying that if a woman votes in a general election, so therefore I am allowed to do this, then I must think it should be inspired by what Martin said, but I do not allow it. And we need to hold hands with each other and not be alone. Because if there's not a crucial thing for senior leaders, is that it's not just a process of institutionalization, it's a process that I think of making them alone. Because of making those senior leaders quite alone. Yes. Because not just in the church, I'll just speak in commercial and in governmental and university organizations. I've seen it as a thing. You rise, and I've been through some of these journeys myself. You rise up to a certain point, that's all fine. Look, you're doing well, you're making a great contribution, you're a great example. But now we start to get a bit more senior, and you start getting more special training courses and this and that. And you start being privileged. Knowledge and privacy and secrecy is fundamental to this. You start being privileged with pieces of information, which it is not ethical to disclose, such as how human resources is used, or whether a whole tier of workers is to be made redundant in a processing department. These are issues which it is technically not correct as a leader to treat as other than confidential, but because it's confidential, you don't discuss them. And in many cases, we don't even discuss them with our partners because we're accused of that for very, very serious obligations of confidentiality. In the meantime, if you are one of those who is writing, now you're probably working on your own. The people who you think you can talk to, who might be relatively similar peers within your organization, become fewer, they become busier, possible issues of rivalry, possible issues of disloyalty to your immediate boss if you talk to someone over there. We have to say we refuse to be made alone, because the making of senior leaders to be alone, as well as the institutionalization of the mind, greatly increases their difficulty in acting in that situation. Far few people would need coaches in that situation if there were legitimate and recognized ways for people to talk and share and not be thought either weak or disregarding ethical obligations that they have undertaken. The leaders of the future, to be able to leaders, would need to be connected leaders. And unfortunately, I'm at a point in my career now, Martin, where if the world suddenly started pulling pictures, the direction we will be limited. But as part of we could free up a lot of money that's being paid to enable people like me to act in private support to individuals if we had a concept of leadership which recognizes that not all information can or should just be shared with anyone. That would be a really bad society to live in. But all leaders must. It is a sign of strength and maturity and a mark for future advancement of our leaders. That they need to develop, keep the connectedness that enables them not lose their soul. But on the Anglican Church, I want to see that.
Sure, I can speak for the Anglican Church. I think one of the challenges I have is that I'm not sure you're the coach coaching through this, but I spent all of my life and all of my ministry in church, in the church in Wales, not in the Church of England. The Church in Wales is a disestablished church, but it's probably more established than the established church. With a huge amount of deference to those people who want to see us made bishops. And I'm sitting here, the conversation about senior leaders. And I said before, you see me as a senior leader. I don't see myself as a senior leader. I thought it's not quite interesting. I don't see myself as a senior leader. And in a sense, it depends how we understand power and the complexities of power. Whatever decision is made within the cathedral context is made together. I don't make a decision. I have no way of making a decision on my own. There's a chief officer, there are other colleagues who are in together, chapter. There's a whole host of different structures in which I do not make a decision on my own, and I prefer them. So I'm again challenged when I sit here in the room today, or when you're saying you up there, I don't see myself with me up there. So it's quite challenging for me to hear somebody else say, so you're up there.
I'm not alone.
No. But it is
You
quite,
are.
well, I don't make any decisions, you see, that is power decision making. Is power about what
Can
is
include certain decision making as an expression. As an expression of it.
I'm always trying to work with people. I don't think I've got any power to influence a bishop. I can maybe say, oh, should I leave him? But I've got no power to do anything about it. Because it's everybody will give it the power, presumably, as we go down. But again, I don't see it like that. I think we all have power together within the church, or within my part of the
And
church.
do you observe bishops acting in the way you're describing? No.
You encourage it? No. No, I don't. I think the culture has put, whether they want it or whether they don't want it, on some sort of pedestal, which is difficult to challenge. And I'm going back to what you were saying, I'm not convinced they started off thinking like panelists. But there is something about the culture
that's institutionalisation. That's exactly what that is.
That's
Once you've got a setup already and you're trying to change it, you've got to break it down and start again. You can't just go, oh, I'll tell you what, we'll have that representative from there, we'll have that one from there. It'll never change anything. You have to actually genuinely
You've
change.
got your history and judgment. How would you do that?
Check out all the bishops.
Wait.
That was a bit
Although I understand the frustration that many of us have about the Gulf and probably the inability to speak out as you really feel and think. We're partly to blame. If we're taking the spirit of the seriously, we have the leaders that we have chosen. And I think Douglas is onto something when he says something about the loneliness of being at the top. I was telling Sue there's a lovely play by David Hare written in the 1980s, Race of Bleak, which is an analysis of the church people. And it looks at a curate, a vicar, and a bishop. And it's blindingly obvious the person with the least power is the bishop. Ironically. The curate hasn't got too much power, but the one person that has got power is the vicar in their parish. So there is something around taking up that power.
Yeah,
But there's something else, you see, because I think that what I wanted to really show is that rather than dismantle, if we take seriously that God is at the heart of all this, it's actually paying attention to what God is inviting us to do next. Now, I come from a sort of systems background, which actually says, let's get the whole system in the room. Let's actually populate the system. And there is a way of working with representatives, constellations, where the Holy Spirit actually makes itself known, when God makes itself known, in terms of the next step that we take. One of the great dangers about, the position of power is saying, I know the way forward. Or they know the way forward, and I'm going to follow them, whatever they say. But actually, if you have the discipline of creating a really safe space, where the loneliness of the bishop, the loneliness of a black lesbian parishioner is actually held really safely. And you start to really explore that in a spirit of faith. We talk about revelation. Things are revealed in order for us to take the next step. So it's no blanket program, but there are methodologies. And interestingly enough, the secular world is brilliant at it. I'll just share with you one thing. Let's talk about crucifixion. There's a whole team of surgeons in a clinical discipline that are thinking, this is what all patients want. And they're all the patients on this side, not really knowing anything at all. And a safe system, safe space created, and you get the surgeons in there, and you get the patients in there and feeding through this process and their families. And the surgeons are going to save everybody. That's their job. And then they hear from the actual patient, someone's doing this. And if it doesn't work out, as long as they know you've done the best, you can live with that. Now that is profoundly freeing. And it's that sort of approach and methodology in which we do it all together. This is the way of the concept. There's another church, there's the program. We will come to the way of servant, the spirit of leaders. So is it surprising that the Quakers have actually got their act together on investments? So there's something we can learn from our brothers and sisters across the world. And those that know faith that can teach us an enormous amount. So I'm not a person without hope. But I do think it's very finely balanced as to whether there's enough knowledge and actually Ubuntu in the way that it can really shift things so that they all stand alongside each other. I'll tell you, not what the dangerous. And it is extraordinary when you meet the living God with your brothers and sisters. You just gently pray. And you know what the next step is. And that's all Abraham did. I was reading in Liverpool earlier today, when I think it's a Roman Catholic cathedral, homage to Abraham, who is the father of the Jewish faith and the Islamic faith and our faith. And the great thing about Abraham, he took one step forward, not knowing where on earth he was going. He was a sojourner, traveller. And that's all that we can ask of each other, just take the next step.
Can I just reply to what you said about dismissing that? I wasn't dismissing it. I come from a background of I was a social worker, and I was also a union rep, and I was also a Black Workers chairperson and a women's officer, and I've done lots of things that are to represent people who are at the bottom and who are being oppressed or suppressed. And what I meant by dismissing, I meant that we as people, regardless of where we are, need to change our mindset about power. Not dismiss it, recognize it, and hold hands, like you were saying, and challenge it, make it different. We have powers as people to change it. I'm socialist, I'm sorry. That's where I come from.
I was thinking we could maybe wrap up at 7:30, which is 10 minutes. So I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I carry on. Maybe bring for some more questions.
The reason why I was so proud and grateful to be able to come here yesterday, and why I said this is the most terrifying talk in life, is I think it's probably the only talk I have given in the world, which I think is prophetic. That I've come to believe that I've been shown something, and my job is not to convince everyone of it, but just to try and put it out there. If there is any truth in that, then it is the case in some way that our infinitely exhaustive Creator wishes us to flourish, not just in the life to come, but as fully as possible in the world we are. And if there is any element of truth in that promise, if Jesus is determined that we shall understand safely, that the mistakes in the Garden of Eden, whatever the cost, we're not going to be abandoned. It's going to be redeemed. It's going to be restored. So in a certain sense, without thinking at all, whatever might be the actions we next need to take, I believe I'm trying to say that if we can survive the climate crisis, one may know, happy in Kumar's world in the 2040s, I think we'll find there will be the Holy Spirit will find ways to make the future better in this respect. And I'm sure the Holy Spirit will welcome all those who can join together in prayer as well as in action. But I think I'm saying it's going to happen because of who God is.
And because of who we are.
And because of who we are.
Because if we are exiled from the garden, or if we have exiled ourselves from the garden and exiled ourselves from ourselves, our destiny is a new Jerusalem, the urban, the coming together of peoples. And I suspect the model of leadership or exercise of power operated by somebody like Sue, is a significant contribution to that building up of a New Jerusalem. The way this ministry here in this church is exercised is a positive contribution to the building up of New Jerusalem. So it's actually having that vision that God is calling us to this rebuilding, not in the gardens, not in isolation, not necessarily in nature or creationism, but in the urban life, in the deepest sense of the word, urban life being us together as a community. So I value so much what you've been saying tonight. I don't need to go and read the essay 3 or 4 times, but I'm holding on to, we are called to build up a new way of belonging to one another. Deeply urban, and I don't mean that in a crudely city or versus, but actually belonging to one another as a people. So thank you for.
If we do that, the climate change problem, I think, will not be a problem because we will respect where we live and where we need to live because we all have relationships.
Yes, because from an Ubuntu perspective, we are all living in small coastal island states, and we are all part of that. I wondered if I could pick on you. Because you're about to start your ordination training. And one of the places of action with the spirit very much imparting of, there's just us all holding hands and saying, if something's not good enough from the system or from senior leaders, I don't accept it as good enough. I just wonder how you feel about, as you see as you live through what you are trained in and the insights that you're offered. I have no idea how power will or will not figure, but how do you feel about the call to say, if you think it's not good enough, saying it's not good enough? Let's have the training. I'm not saying this will be my kind of training, but do you have some thoughts? Because I've had a thought. I do actually think that the secular system is not going to deliver change. The power structure is too powerful. And I think there is an opportunity. I think that if priests of the future thought they wanted to be trained in things that would better enable them both deal with internal patterns of power, but offer something to my Abbey and my two martyr children being born this year, going to university, so there's something here to understand. And if it's God who wants us to understand it, and if it's God who models the behaviors necessary to share that understanding, which is what I'm trying to argue, why wouldn't it be priests, amongst others, but why wouldn't it be priests playing a part in bringing that emancipation to others? But I think you're well capable of responding, but do you want to say something?
And you know what I would, if I had to turn around to an institution, which is a training institution, and do what you said you did. If you turn around and say, I'm not going to do that, or I don't believe that was God's calling me to do, the power is in the hands of the trainers, because they could turn around and say,
not well fitted for.
ordained ministry.
So I've just done a first year in training college, and I think exactly that. I actually, to be very honest, would be quite reserved to be so honest about that, for the fear that they say, no, sorry, you're not right. Because actually, I think that's a very real possibility, and that's the problem. And so, kind of, there's this kind of, I don't know, thought about just kind of keep your head low and get through it, and then maybe at some point you can say something. But until you've got all the eyes on you, and every move you make is being watched and judged, and you've got reports about you, that's really hard. And maybe we should try it, I don't know, but
going over here.
That's brave to do
Yes.
Maybe we all did it. Yes.
I encourage you to go that way, because the great thing is that what young people don't know is that older people actually bend over backwards. You only get, my view is you only get to a certain stage unless you, and I'll help you like a coach later on in life. I think what I'm trying to say is, if you're not going to do it now, when are you? And the other thing is, you've really got to trust in God. And there are ways of doing it. I mean, I was in that situation a number of years ago. At the end of my first year, stop this, I'm done. I said, I'm done. My principal saw something in me that was different, but I had the courage. Said, right, I've given this a year. I know it's what I wanted to do, but I really can't cut it. I just disagree. It's terrible. It's time. It's terrible. I'm on.
You can see why he's going to Kent.
So, but really test, push the boundaries out of a real spirit of curiosity, because everything's provisional. I push, it's not my real belief at the moment. I'm pushing it out to see what comeback I get. And between us, we'll get there.
But also the support of the Henry and Catherine story is that it's not a story, it's a true life thing, and it's not is that what I said was, when the moment of crisis comes, often it seems that there's only a very few or limited ways of acting, but that part of the process of being together in a safe space with those who have something to offer, whatever that may be, which may absolutely not be formal expertise, but lived experience, is to say, let's invest the time in a safe space together to work out if there is a way for Catherine to act in that situation, whereby the highly likely outcome of her losing her job and her reputation through having challenged the word of her boss could be managed and avoided. So I think it does take courage, and I think it does take a decision to say, actually, this isn't peripheral to the future of God's kingdom, it's central to the future of God's kingdom. But that doesn't mean that God wants us to be stupid about it. And that part of the way power works is to keep us isolated, to keep us thinking that we're alone. Then we have to find, well, what is a safe way to have this conversation where it can't just go, where we can actually move forward without it going down on, whatever. If you have a way to get me, if you want to invite me to come and speak on leadership training.
We have leadership modules.
Yes, well, we can do leadership training. Anyway,
Well, I feel like the conversation is getting really exciting now, and I don't really want to stop it, but I'm conscious that people might need to depart if they'd like to. So we're going to carry on being here in the next half an hour or so anyway. If anyone wants to stay, perhaps they can carry on asking questions to you.
Or why don't we just...
Do you want to carry on a more informal question time? I'm going to stop the recording, and then perhaps we can just applaud Douglas for
I mentioned an essay I wrote which I focusing on a number of and that's it's free. It's on my writing website, which is just douglasford.com. This talk, and I'm sorry if it's scripted, but I would have been about 2 hours if I hadn't scripted it. I will post it by Wednesday. So douglasford.com again, that would be free. And if you're interested to read the book Elites, the publisher has given them 25% off for this week. And that's at iBooks. Just look at Douglasford Elites, go to the publisher's website. If you enter the code Rev'd, D-R-I-D-E, at the checkout, then
Stop this now.